Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets kicked off their preseason with a loss to the LA Clippers, but there were some fantastic sample sizes for the expansion of Cam Thomas's game. We dive into that and the bench rotation and position battles all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can win big all season long with FanDuel. Place your $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And Doug, we get started in a preseason that we understand is leading towards a regular season that's going to have a lot of losing to do for Brooklyn. But there are some interesting sample sizes, not only for Cam Thomas, Ben Simmons, and other players for the Brooklyn Nets ahead of the year.
Well, buddy, we had to start with an NBA League Pass snafu where the game couldn't even be viewed by any viewer. So no better way to start off a tanking season than when NBA League Pass decides to tank just to start things off, where you miss the first few minutes of the game because of total question mark. But eventually we got there and we were able to watch.
The Nets also missed the start of this game, by the way, just to be clear, based on the score. They realized League Pass was going to have a problem, so they didn't bother checking in until it was about 13-2 or so.
Yeah, I think it was way worse than that. But anyway, we finally get this tanking season underway. It does seem like the Nets, at least to start, are understanding the tanking assignment with this first loss, even though it's just a preseason game. But it's just, for our purposes, it's just nice to have hoops back, right? It's nice to be able to start to look at this team. Nice to be able to start to think about sort of how things are going to unfold for the Nets this year. Who's going to be a key player? Who's going to maybe expand their game? Who's going to be around? Who's not going to be? I mean, it all starts here with where the preseason starts. And we have to probably just start honestly with Cam Thomas. There's probably no other Nets player with more eyes on him this year in terms of what can happen for him in terms, just looking at his overall NBA trajectory and his overall arc. And we've looked at, wanting to see an expansion in his game and to see if he can sort of grow as a player and become a league-wide force with the skills he already had. And I think we saw some clear signs early on that the Nets are going to give him at least the chance to expand that skill set. I think we started to see that from what happened in this first preseason game.
Yeah, obviously wouldn't expect any of the starters to be playing big minutes. Nobody played more than 18 out of the starting 5. Cam Thomas, 17 minutes, 3 of 5 from the field, 2 of 4 from beyond the arc, knocked down all 4 trips to the line, gave you 12 points, but also 2 assists, a steal, a rebound mixed in there as well. And listen, we'll always talk about what his offensive game looks like and his shooting prowess, etc. But what I liked about this, we'll start on the offensive end, was just that, and maybe a little glimpse of Jordi Fernandez. Ball movement seemed to be a key point here for the offense, making sure to make the extra second and third pass. And while it may only say a couple of assists in the stat sheet, it just looked like Cam Thomas was being asked to do and is going to be asked to trust the offensive structure and not treat this like my opportunity, my ball first, my looks first. And if he plays within the offense, that does expand the way that we look at who he is as a total offensive player as opposed to an offensive scorer alone.
Yeah, you look in the box score and you see the 5 shots, and that that can kind of tell you a little bit of a story. Not too much of one in only 17 minutes, although he does, again, one thing he's been super consistent about, and is really Frank's got to be one of the best in the league, is just getting to the free throw line, right? Going 4 for 4 from the line, drawing contact, making sure he can get to the rim, contorting his body in ways that just makes him get fouled more. And then because he knows he just has the overall core strength to be able to finish through contact also. So it makes sense that he wants to try to get to the rim. But we also saw, I thought the best window for me was this brief run when Dennis Schroeder and Ben Simmons both came out of the lineup, and he was effectively point guard. Keon Johnson came in and was playing essentially the 2, and Cam Thomas. Now, it was a little bit funky because there were some transition sequences in here, and there was some pressure off the inbound where it was unclear who was kind of supposed to be bringing the ball up. But if you went back and watched it, it did appear that was a 2-3 minute window where it was Cam Thomas is the point guard, and Keon Thomas, who's not really a pure point guard in and of himself either, are going to be these 2 guards. And this might be the evolution of Cam Thomas at the point, right? Like we've been wondering if they would try to make this happen, even if it's in brief stretches. Would we be able to see a time when it wasn't just him coming off ball screens and pin downs and just ISOing? Was it going to be him bringing the ball up the court, walking them into the offense, and beginning to facilitate the offense in a way that just had him as more of a creator than just an on-ball scorer? And again, is it reading into like a really small window into what they tried to do? Probably a little bit, but I think it was purposeful. And I think that this is going to be something we see more. And I think that's just going to mean a growth in his game, as long as there's an understanding that like they can kind of take the lumps when it doesn't go perfectly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, as you mentioned, when you have Schroeder and Simmons come out. So inside of that starting five, Cam Thomas is the only young player effectively, in that 5-man unit. And while it's first preseason game and not everyone's playing and not everyone's available, we get all that stuff. Nic Claxton, especially, who would obviously be in the starting unit in some capacity. It's interesting to think about flexing out of, maybe we like having Dennis Schroeder and having Simmons together in the backcourt, and we want Cam Thomas to be able to play off ball and be able to get those catch and shoot triples on the outside and be a floor spacer in those instances. But if you can then also give him that little taste of running the point where it's maybe, listen, in this season, no minutes are going to be high leverage minutes per se for the Brooklyn Nets, but where it's not as critical, where you still are getting the both and. Be the pure scorer, be the offensive weapon, and then let's try to get you working into that side of your game so that by the end of this season or by midway through this season, when maybe some of these veterans are off this roster, you can transition into that role in a more expanded capacity without feeling like it's 0 to 60, right? Without feeling like you didn't have that fit with the current personnel, and now all of a sudden we're going to thrust you into that. So maybe a little more intentional there from Jordi Fernandez on that side. The other piece of it,
real quick though, one thing about to add to is like I think that some of this will be born out of necessity. They really just have so few guards in this lineup. Now, Killian Hayes didn't play. We know that Watford wasn't there. They ran him a little bit of like this effective point guard at times last year. So there were a couple guys out. We're not exactly sure who's going to end up making the team. And which guards are going to come through, but they're just going to be short on guards almost no matter what. Like almost no matter which way this plays out this season, they are where their biggest weakness is probably going to be is just guys who can like dribble at an NBA level or end to end. And like, he is kind of just one of the few guys on the team that can do that. So even from that functional standpoint, it's going to make sense that they try to get this to work.
Yeah, ball handling. Not even, we say point guard, but it's just ball handlers, right? There's not a lot of guys that can do that, and Cam Thomas can. Coming up here in a second, though, we want to get into Ben Simmons. We want to get into rotations and position battles, but there's another aspect of Cam Thomas's game coming out of this first preseason game that I thought jumped out of the TV in a major way. We'll break that down coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, NBA fans too. You can get in on the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's number one sports book. Maybe you're getting 100 in the middle of the game. That could be NFL or NBA. You can check out the latest stats. You view the live play-by-play, so much more. This is the same page where you place your bets. They got preseason NBA going here too, but Nets were plus 5.5 going in against the Clippers the other night on FanDuel. Didn't cover, shocker. Might be the story of the season. Also, FanDuel's got those season-long props up there right now where the Nets are sitting at 18.5 wins gross. But hey, this is kind of the way it's designed, but it might be a down season for you. Going to be an up season over on FanDuel. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You just got to place your first $5 real money bet. Once again, grab $200 in bonus bets. Use a $5 bet to get started. That's FanDuel.com, America's number one sportsbook.
All right, so as we continue on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the first preseason game for the Brooklyn Nets, and obviously Cam Thomas being at the forefront. There's a lot of other things we want to get to here, and I never want to overstate small sample sizes. But when I watched Cam Thomas on the defensive end of this court in this preseason game, it felt starkly different than anything I've seen from him, just in terms of intensity, just in terms maybe of confidence, just in terms of willingness. Watched him picking up players 3/4 court. Watched him getting into the body of James Harden, trying to close out on corner looks. It wasn't all perfect, wasn't all pretty, but there does seem to be something different. We heard this from Jordi Fernandez at Media Day. What was going to be asked? How do you elevate his game? What's asked of him? It just feels like that was an element that I'll be curious to watch for here, because that does represent growth. It doesn't matter to overall what his career is going to look like, but you do need to be, we said, a speed bump at times, I actually thought that there looked like there was some clear understanding of what he needs to do defensively and a willingness to go after that. That's like that little extra feather that I always like seeing from Cam Thomas before we move on to Simmons.
Yeah, like I think that, as for as much as they got down early in this game, I don't think it was like totally an effort standpoint. I mean, the Clippers hit some crazy tough shots, like some really crazy threes where they just were kind of had guys draped all over them and we're still hitting them. So I don't really want to go crazy about the defensive effort. I think it was definitely there from his standpoint and really kind of from everyone's standpoint. I think I really do hope when you're a tanking team, like with Jordi Fernandez, you do hope that there's a recognition that like everyone still has to go out there and try. I do think like there's no risk of Thomas getting benched or anything like that, but there is a risk. The guy's still got to get a contract here. Right? Like they haven't extended him. So there's still money on the table for him. And part of that's going to probably be effort based, I would think. Yeah. And you would hope that that's going to be the case. So if everyone's kind of bought in if everyone can still get bought in on like, I want to get paid lines, like that does go far in motivating people. And yeah, no, I thought the effort was fine there.
Talking about Ben Simmons, the other player that obviously mattered here in a big way for Brooklyn, 100% healthy, ready to get back out there. Listen, I don't know if this looks starkly different than anything that we saw in 15 games a year ago or in previous instances. I don't think we're going to have a real understanding about whether or not, even at 100% health, if Ben Simmons is going to be anything more than some of the small glimpses we've gotten over the past 2+ seasons, right? Like the box score tells you a lot. The transition game, he attacked at the basket. He had a couple of nice moments, but my eyes weren't opened in some miraculous way. Not that I anticipated that. Is that fair for Ben Simmons?
It's the exact same. Nothing changed. It's the same. Like there's no difference. You're sugarcoating, if anything. Like you're being super nice. Like if you're being nice for reasons I'm not totally clear about. It looked exactly the same. It's
just preseason game one. I don't know. Let's
if it was preseason game one. If it was preseason game 1 2 years ago, fine. Yeah. We've been through this. How many times we have to see this happen? Like it's just not happening. Like he can't do it. I don't know why. Physical, non-physical, mental, not mental, emotional, not emotional. I don't know what the reason is. He's not doing the things. It's been a million excuses. It's a million excuses. Oh, well, he's working back. It's a preseason game, working back from injury. Okay, fine, whatever. It's over. It's over. He can't do it. Like is this an overstatement based on one preseason game? It is. By the way, would we take in this tact if it was nothing but talk of how healthy he is and how great it's going to look and having the trainer come out and everyone talk about how great it is? You do this to yourself when you just have these as your talking lines all the time. Yeah. If you're gonna inflate yourself up a lot, then you just run the risk of more deflation if it doesn't go wrong. And this is, to me, this is the thing. It all looked the same. Back to the basket. Can't beat smaller defenders. Can't beat slower defenders. Like got Zoo on him. Zoo just dropped back into the paint. Oh, that was the end of that. Like he's not going anywhere, right? Yeah. Gets a smaller defender like Kevin Porter Jr. Gets a smaller defender on him. Can't finish over him because he doesn't have any faith in any of his shots that aren't happening directly at the rim. Starts most offensive possessions with his back to the basket, finishes them with his back to the basket because he's just running DHOs or wants to come set a screen, get the ball, and then fire a pass as quickly as he can to a shooter, which is like fine if you're doing it sometimes. But if that's just all you're going to do, then we're going to see box scores like 13 minutes, 1 for 5, no trips to the free throw line, 2 points. None of the other shots the shots that missed didn't look all that close. So sorry to sound like frustrated by it, but we wanted to come in. It's all talk. We want to come into the season and talk about how he's turned a corner and this is going to be the season. Maybe it'll happen and I'll eat crow then. I will. If he comes out and goes crazy, I swear to God, I will just be like, I was wrong. I'll be the first to admit it. There's not been a single thing for years that has shown that it's going to change. And if you thought it was going to happen, there is no chance you can look at this first preseason game and have any confidence it's going to.
No, you're 100% right. And my necessity to sugarcoat, who knows why. Maybe I just hate to have to have the same conversation again about him. And the key stat that you can even say jumps out of the beyond everything else in the eye test is the no trips to the free throw line. It's just you're too big of a player. You should be able to dominate other matchups physically too many times, or you should be able to take advantage of what defenses give you. If you went 0 for 7 from the line in this game at however many minutes, you'd say, okay, we know that he's a bad free throw shooter. He's got to clean that up. But we can look at how much more aggressively he played going at the basket. Instead, it was very much the exact same thing we've seen from sample sizes out of him. And in that regard, you can stay on him if you want to. I feel like we'll continue to watch preseason games here for sure when it comes to his performances. But in that regard, in the starting rotation, it's why then you look over and you say, well, Dennis Schroeder, when I'm sitting here and I see him go 4 of 7, when I see him give out 5 assists, when I see him have 3 rebounds, a couple of steals, only gets to the line once, but that's not a part of his game. Just to your point about having ball handlers and a little sample on Cam Thomas, I think that those things matter because you were 100% right in saying follow the money. That's what the starting rotation is going to look like. And not one preseason game is going to change that. But I will say this. If this is how Ben Simmons is going to look through preseason and going into the regular season, you're going to have a different conversation about what the starting rotation is and where he fits into it and how often you're going to experiment with him and Nic Claxton or with things that on paper don't make a lot of sense from rotation standpoint. Not a lot of veterans are going to, I think, fall prey to that from a Jordi Fernandez coaching perspective. But wins and losses be darned. Like, there has to come a relatively short leash on the Ben Simmons. Is the health back, and is he back to being a better version of himself if this is the sample size we're going to get?
Look, he still had some nice moments. He found Zaire Williams cutting baseline. Thought that was a little slip pass was nice. And got Shake Milton on a cutter, cutting through the lane for a nice finish. Like, there were moments where it looked like there was a couple things he can do. There are some things he can still do. He has good court vision. He can definitely find guys who are moving. He can do those things. And that's fine. But if we're talking about, if you're going to hype yourself up that it's the best you've been playing since you've been an all-NBA guy, and you're going to be the one that said, not us. You and your team are going to be the one that says this and just never stops talking about this. Okay, that's fine. But then when it looks like this, then this is the other side of it, right? Like, again, come in and say, hey, we're going to say something else. When you're going to say, it's back to all NBA Ben Simmons, you're going to see all the hate, all the stuff that's going to happen. You're going to see, you didn't see any of it. He can't do any of those things or just doesn't want to. And there are some things he does fine. He's probably still better than most other guys on the Nets. Like, he should probably still play if that's the case. Most other guys, he probably still is better than them for sure. But that old Ben Simmons, it's gone. It's gone. It would take so much to make me ever believe at this point it was going to come back.
We're going to get into rotations and then obviously position battles as we look at this first sample size in the preseason game. Just the last quick note coming out of that starting rotation. Dorian Finney-Smith played with some nice bounce over his 18 minutes, got to the line 6 times, also had 3 assists in this one. Clunky night maybe for Cam Johnson from a shooting perspective, just to round out where the other couple of veterans were here as we turn our attention coming up in a moment to the rotation, who came in first, and critically, who was trying to maybe claim those last couple of positions on this roster heading into the regular season. We'll do that here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Gametime. You're looking for tickets. You want to go to the game. You want to go to the theater. You want to go to a concert, the comedy show. So many things to get tickets for these days. Gametime has you covered for all of them. Gametime Picks makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. If you can believe it, filters out the fluff. It's only going to show you the incredible deals with the seat on great seats. So you don't have to waste time searching through all those different thousands of tickets. Just find those super deals right away. See exactly what you're going to see in the seat. You're going to sit down before you buy. You got the lowest price guarantee. You're going to grab those curated deals too. You're going to find the best prices on what you actually want to see, and make sure you're in the best place to see it as well. They got event cancellation protection, job loss protection. It's all there. You're completely covered top to bottom when it comes to Gametime. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, taking a look at that preseason game number 1, and what will we continue to watch as we move forward? Now, you mentioned there at the top, no Killian Hayes. I said this over on social. The one guy that cannot afford to be injured in the preseason if he's trying to make hay here is probably Killian Hayes, even though the Nets do have a need for ball handlers, as we've mentioned. It just seems like it's going to be hard for him if he's dealing with injuries and unable to maybe give a sample size on that Exhibit 10 contract. That being said, when we look at who came off the bench first, and you have the Jalen Wilsons of the world, Zaire Williams got big minutes here too. We had also talked about coming into this, the Shake Milton of it all. And he actually did get some run in this game. Just who jumped out to you when we talk about first players in and where these position battles may live for the Brooklyn Nets in preseason?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to see what those rotations would look like. And, we got the sense, Clowney and Jalen Wilson checking in at the 5:41 mark in the first quarter. Those were the first two guys in for Simmons and DFS. Like, that was an interesting sign to me. Not surprising on Clowney. Was a little curious about where Jalen Wilson would fall into that hierarchy, right? Like, knew Clowney would be there. Figured he would be at worst seventh man, right? And figured he'd probably be, especially with the center situation, that he'd be right around here. Jalen Wilson, though, coming in before some of these other guys, I did think that's interesting. And I think that's probably pretty sticky too, right? Just based on like some of these wings guys are going to get traded. And the fact that none of the wings were really hurt and he still came in along that line, I think that's a really promising thing for him. Zaire Williams definitely stood out with how sort of like the off ball movement. You can see it defensively from him. We're going to always wonder if the shooting is going to come around. He ends up playing the 23 minutes. Again, I'm not surprised by that too, because I think he's the other guy that's probably going to get the really, really long look here. That was my biggest takeaway. Some of these guards, I do wish Killian Hayes had played so I could more effectively judge sort of where everyone stood. Maybe you're right. Like maybe just being injured makes the decision for the Nets. I'm not really sure, but it was those guys who came in first, like the first three guys in off the bench. That's where I think like sort of the most important information lies. And I think we'll probably get a better sense of the guard stuff next game. That's my take on it. Maybe you see it differently.
No, I think, this is when we talk in the off season about how I want starting rotations to look and, which young players I think should be involved. The Jalen Wilson piece of it is important, right? He wins Summer League player, which is important for him. You want to see a commitment, I think. Noah Clowney being the higher pick, the first round pick, we know what his runway looks like. But Jalen Wilson showed some things, not only at the back end of last season, but then in this summer league where you go, okay, can you actually be the guy that we want to rely on even more consistently? And can we put you at the top of that pecking order? We're talking about floor spacing, shooting, did a nice job for himself from the field. So I love the fact that 2 draft picks, as we talked about in the offseason, a year from now, we don't know what this entire roster is going to look like. Jalen Wilson, maybe they're putting him in a position to say, you can stake your claim to being a part of the future core early this year, and then that'll just be who you are. And we don't even have to worry about that as much either. So I like seeing him. And to your point on Zaire Williams, I just think that this is his opportunity. He has length, looked good shooting the ball. Like in this one was 5 and 9 from the field. You mentioned a couple of assists, had 3 steals in this game too. That length defensively really stood out to me, and he gave you 10 points. So, okay, rinse and repeat. Go do that again in preseason game 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll probably be talking about him, I think, the way we talked about Trendon Watford when they first picked him up. Here's a flyer. Do we think he can stick? Can he get himself a role? Nice blend. If you're Jordi Fernandez, of saying veterans are going to get their run, and then we have these young players that we believe can be contributors for us. The only other talking point to me, I'll just say visually, was Shake Milton and Keon Johnson and, just their minutes and what that's going to look like. We weren't sure about Milton, even with the guaranteed money. It's not big enough to say that he's going to be a part of it. Just visually, as the backcourt has always been small for Brooklyn or slight, Shake Milton looks big for the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah. Just when you see him on the court in terms of that position. Do you take anything away from his 19 minutes in this first one?
Not a ton, except that he played again. I feel like we don't have a great sense of it because the Hayes thing. I sometimes hate when there's an absence of information that makes it very difficult to tell like what the truth is. And I kind of got the sense with that was the case here. Now, again, that could just be what it is. And Hayes is just not part of what's happening here. Maybe we're putting up too much faith that he even has some kind of like set spot in this roster, which he clearly doesn't. Yeah. And maybe this is just how it's going to shake out. Keon Johnson played so well during summer league that you want to hope that he kind of makes sure, gets the stick here. Milton, I agree with you. He did look a little bit bigger. It kind of threw me off too, because also it was like a situation where the feed I was watching on had no announcers. Right. And usually I think a lot of time that's frankly better, but where it's worse a couple times is especially when you're getting used to new players on the team, where you're like, because visually, we watch so much Nets basketball, you're used to who everyone is, and then there's new players, and it just takes a second to kind of figure out, especially when when no one's telling you who the guys are, you're like, oh, who is that? I got caught a little bit there, and actually with Milton, I thought I got confused for a second because he looked so big that I was like, oh, I thought that was like a wing. I thought it was a wing, like in my mind's
Yeah.
eye. And then I was like, oh no, it's Shake Milton. So no, I totally agree with you on that sense. But I just think it was such an incomplete picture that it's hard for me to get too excited or down about what happened here, just because I hate to say it. It's such a cop out, but I do want to just like kind of give it another game.
Yeah, and when it comes to rotations and position battles, that's what I think all the preseason games are for. If we rewind it back to the top at a high level, Cam Thomas looks good. Cam Thomas looks like he's trying to expand some things for his game. That's good to see from him. That matters the most in terms of the big picture. Ben Simmons, nothing new. That's a problem, or at least, or it's not a problem given the Nets season and what the goals are here, but it's a problem, as Doug said, from the hype you're bringing into the year versus what we get in our first sample. Not great. All the veterans look their part, nothing surprising there. And now I just think we look at who are these young players that we maybe get excited about watching the development of over the course of this season. Few more preseason games to go. Probably the right approach, as you say. Give me 3 more samples, because that's how I'm going to solidify. Good shooting night from Martin, by the way, when he came in. That doesn't mean anything, right? Like, it doesn't matter until you get 40, 50 minutes over these preseason games from all these guys. That paints a clearer picture about what their value is, and then also how Jordi Fernandez uses them.
Yeah. Again, like, it's preseason, not trying to go overboard here with like what, all these huge takeaways. Are we going to learn tons and tons and tons? I think some of it is effective. Some of it is kind of just a little noisy based on just who gets to play, and it's really small sample size and stuff like that. I always think the biggest takeaways are just sort of the order of who comes in. I do think that's like the most important information. The order by which people kind of enter the court, regardless of sort of how they end up playing, is the most important thing. We see this in summer league all the time. We see it in preseason too. The order is the very clear coach telling you, this is the order that I value the players. That's it.
Yep.
Right. Yep. Like that's really pretty simple. They can say whatever they want, and not overall minutes in the end. Order in which they get in the game, because that's your best chance to actually play with the guys who for sure are going to play in the season, and like, i.e. the starting 5. So anyway, just something to keep an eye on for the next game as well.
You better believe it, man. And they'll have, again, a few more to go here. We'll see how it shakes out. Good signs for Jalen Wilson. We'll continue to break it down as we move along. And we'll talk maybe a little bit more about where Hayes stands with his injury and whether or not there's expectations he'll be able to get out there and how it will shake out, and zero in a little more on Keon Johnson, maybe Shake Milton just in the short term. Does he offer value that is worth the Brooklyn Nets holding on to as we think about veterans and tradable commodities at the deadline?
All right, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to Locked On Nets over at YouTube. Let's get up to 8,000 subscribers. We'll be here all season long. Nets might be in the tank, not this podcast, baby. Just subscribe wherever you listen.
Infinite growth of material consumption is infinite in the world of impossibility. Whew, that's a mouthful, and that's from E.F. Schumacher.
All right, one of the all-time great poets. Back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.